Luke chapter 7. Luke chapter 7. It's time to bounce back. Luke chapter 7. A few verses. We want to commence our reading at verse 11 and conclude our reading at verse 14. Luke 7, verses 11 through 14. And I am reading from the NRSV version of the Bible. And it reads, soon afterwards, he went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went with him. As he approached the gate of the town, a man who had died was being carried out. He was his mother's only son, and she was a widow. And with her was a large crowd from the town. When the Lord saw her, that's good news right there, he had compassion for her. And he said to her, do not weep. Then he came forward. He touched the bier, and the bearer stood still. And he said, young man, I say to you, rise. I want to talk to you for a few moments from this thought. Don't write yourself off. Don't write yourself off. Don't write yourself off. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. That's right. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? You may shoot me with your words. You may cut me with your eyes. You may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. This compendious poem, heralded by Maya Angelou, apprehends the attention of anyone who refuses to wallow in self-doubt and despair. In this poem, which she entitles Still I Rise, Angelou propounds an antagonistic relationship with denigrating and destructive narratives that told her she was not good enough. The poet, in the opening stanza, you may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies, provides the literary space for readers to acknowledge their acquiescence and their resilience over degradation. It is easy and innately a part of the human experience to judge ourselves through the windows of someone else. When life circumstances do not unravel according to our plans and our predictions. When our lives become cluttered with chaos and confusion, we surmise that something must be wrong with us. Because as we peer through the lives of others, it seems like they are basking in productivity and luxuriousness. But let me take a hermeneutical pause right there and warn you on today, things are not always as they seem. I know it looks good, But let me give you some ancestral wisdom. Everything that glitters isn't gold. Let me ride down Old School Boulevard for a minute and hermeneutically stop at Big Mama's house and remind you on today that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. What you tell yourself is of paramount importance. And if you continuously doubt yourself, those doubts will distort the perception that you have about yourself. If you accept from other people that you are not good enough, you will eventually believe that you are not enough. And every circumstance that does not conclude in the way you visualize will somehow imply that you are not enough. Now, I'll be the first to admit that you cannot control what others think about you, but here it is, you can control what you think about yourself. There are stark differences between what you did and who you are. Yes, you made some mistakes in life, no different than anyone else, but you are not a mistake. Hear me clearly on this morning. Just because some of your relationships failed does not suggest in the slightest way that you are a failure. I understand that you did not pass a few classes here and there, but that does not mean that you are not smart enough. You've made some bad investments, but that does not mean that you have nothing else to give. You cannot write an autobiography of your entire life based upon what you are going through right now. Why, preacher? Because God can rewrite the story of your life. God has a track record of speaking life into dead situations. You cannot judge your life by looking through the windows of someone else, because here it is, you don't know the tragedy. You don't know the trauma, nor do you know the tumultuous circumstances that someone else had to navigate in and around. You don't know their triumphs over tragedy and all the things they had to go through. I know you think their lives are picture perfect. But what you cannot see in that portrait of their life is the number of times they cried themselves to sleep. What you cannot see in that portrait of their life is the number of times they questioned God's motives because they could not track God's movements. What you cannot see in that portrait of their life is the ups and the downs of their life. You may have a snapshot of my life right now, but who and what you see on today has not always been. You don't know my story. You don't know the things I've come through. You cannot imagine the pain, the trials I've had to endure. You don't know my story. You don't know the day God set me free. You cannot imagine the strongholds and the walls that severed me. But when you look at me on today, what you see is that my story proves that God can use me, and deliverance is my testimony. And if God can use someone else, all I'm suggesting and submitting to you on today is that God can use you. When folks said you would never amount to anything, is there anybody willing to shout, God delivered me from denigrating narrative? When folks wrote you off and walked out of your life, can you not attest that God brought you out? If we're being honest and truthful with ourselves on today, God brought you during those times when you could not bring yourself, and God kept you in those moments when you could not keep yourself, just in case you need to challenge the veracity of this assertion, because you already eulogized yourself. I brought key witnesses with me this morning who can vouch for me and testify with me. And here's what they say to us on today: do not write yourself off, because God can resurrect dead situations. Matter of fact, this is not the first situation, and it will not be the last situation that God resurrected. as is the case with life dependent upon where you peer through the windows of this text. You may not acquire an accurate picture of the brokenness and the despair that permeates this passage, especially when you try to compare this widow's story to other widows. As readers and as students of the Bible peering through the pages of this pericope, we meet an unnamed woman whom the writer of this text identifies by her circumstances. This woman, here it is, she does not have a name. We only know her by her circumstances. And I can sense your agitation. Why should it matter that she does not have a name? Why is it existentially problematic or ontologically perplexing that we only know her by her circumstances? For those of you in here this morning with a good Sunday school education, I know you are already thinking she is not the first nameless widow in the Bible. She is not the first person to be identified by her circumstances. And you're right, you're at the greater peace. Many of you have been taking copious notes as you listen to Pastor Neil. You got it, you're correct. This is not the first nameless person or widow in the Bible. The Bible says that Elijah resurrected an unnamed widow's son in 1 Kings chapter 16. And Elisha resurrected an unnamed widow's son in 2 Kings chapter 4. Here it is. The problem, don't miss this, the problem with comparisons is that you think you can predict the outcome of someone's life because you know their circumstances. The problem with labels is that you think you know someone else's potential because they exude similar characteristics of someone in your past. But I'm here to tell you on today, you cannot judge the ability of one person because they remind you of someone else. People will label you before they know you. People will talk about you without having a conversation with you. Some of your greatest detractors in life will come from your inner circle. Kelly Price said it was a friend of mine that used what she knew. As Jesus of Nazareth, the carpenter from Nazareth, and his disciples, along with a large crowd of followers, approached the gate in the town of Nain, he stumbled into a funeral procession. Verse 12 says, when a man who had died was being carried out. When Jesus of Nazareth saw the widow, when he saw this grieving mother, the Bible says he had compassion on her. This is one of the fascinating features that makes the Lucan narrative so powerful. Unlike the other synoptic writers, that is Matthew and Mark, Luke depicts Jesus of Nazareth as someone who sees, whom and what the other writers overlook. Jesus of Nazareth, he saw her and was moved with compassion. His compassion allowed him to see what others could not see. What are you saying, preacher? Here it is. Tread lightly on who you dismiss. Because God sees what you cannot see. When others around you could only see your faults, and when others around you could only see your failures, when others around you were quick to remind you of who you were and what you used to do, is there anybody that can testify that God saw you for you? Thing I like about God is you don't have to put on a front or a facade when it comes to God. You don't have to pretend to be something that you are not. I can feel the old church sneaking up on me. Amazing grace shall always be my song of praise. For it was grace that brought my liberty. I don't know why God came to love me so, but God looked looked beyond my faults and saw my needs. Is there anybody that can testify that God looked beyond each and every one of my faults and God met each and every one of my needs? Jesus of Nazareth, he saw her. He had compassion for her. And he said to her, let me unpack this, I'm out your way. He said to her, do not weep. He saw her. He had compassion for her. And he said to her, do not weep. Can I be honest with you on today? This statement did not sit well with me at first. It just didn't make any sense. How can you say, preacher, Jesus of Nazareth saw her, and in seeing her, he had compassion for her? And because of the compassion that he had for her, he decided to speak to her. And when he spoke to her, he said to her, do not weep. It just doesn't make any sense. What do you mean, Jesus, do not weep? She lost her husband some time ago, and by the time we peer through the windows of this text, we find this nameless widow carrying out the final arrangements for her deceased son, and you say to her, do not weep? She has no financial security or protection, but you say do not weep. She has plummeted into a state of hopelessness and a state of helplessness, and in her broken state, Jesus of Nazareth says to her, do not weep. Here it is. Have you ever been at a point? Have you ever been at a period? Have you ever been at a place in your life where you desperately needed to hear from God? And when God finally spoke to your situation, nothing God said made sense. Okay, I know you're going to pretend that every prayer that you uttered, God answered with clarity and precision, but that isn't always true. He said what he said to her. He said to her, do not weep. This bothered me, so I had to etymologically deconstruct the word said. And I'm about to make you shout. The word said, yeah, it comes from the Greek word lego. Said comes from the Greek word lego. In the Greek, that's Lego, that's lambda, epsilon, gamma, omega, which means to lay an argument to rest. Lego, to bring something to a closure. Lego, to move to a place of conclusion. Jesus of Nazareth is pushing this nameless widow to a place of closure. He is pushing her to a point of acceptance. He is pushing her beyond the point of codependency. Give me 2 minutes and I'm about to hope you real quick. Jesus of Nazareth, he sees her. He had compassion for her, and he said to her, do not weep. The word weep comes from the Greek word kaleo. Kalao. In the Greek, that's kappa, lambda, alpha, iota, omega, which means to weep. Kaleo, to mourn. Kaleo, to bewail. Kaleo, to lament out loud. This nameless widow, this grieving mother who just lost her son, receives instruction from Jesus not to weep. Okay, here it is. He says to her, do not weep, but he does not say, do not cry. Okay, you missed it. He says to her, do not weep, but he does not say to her, do not cry. There is a difference between weeping and crying. Jesus of Nazareth is helping this mother move to a place of closure. This is probably the first time in her life where she had to depend on God. Why do you say that, preacher? I'm so glad you asked. Remember, according to the societal norms and the patriarchal customs of that time, her survival depended upon others, a man, to be precise. She depended on her father until she got married. Once married, she depended on her husband, and after her husband's demise, she depended on her son. The problem that emerges in this text stems from the fact that her daddy, her husband, nor her son are anywhere around. Everybody that she depended on was snatched out of her life. Here it is. God will allow you to go through some things in life that illuminates your codependency. It's good to have others praying for you, but at some point you better learn how to pray for yourself. She cannot accept the newness that Jesus of Nazareth can give until she has moved beyond the point of codependency. She must accept the reality of what is before she can embrace what can be. Meek Mill said it best. Y'all know Meek Mill. He said, I asked God to remove my enemies from my life. And before I knew it, I started losing some friends. And that's my homiletical exit right there. Some of you are in some situations that God told you to leave a long time ago. Stop grieving over people. Stop grieving over situations that God has already released you from. I didn't say don't cry. You can cry because the pain was real. But if Paul Morton was here right now, he would tell you to cry your last tear. I don't know what God is going to do, but I know it's going to be all right. So I say to you on today, as Jesus of Nazareth said in verse 14, rise. You have the ability through the power of God to rise above your circumstances and your situation. I know you feel hopeless, and there are times when you feel helpless, but be encouraged on today because God can speak life into dead situations. When you feel as if you cannot move on, when you are ready and willing to throw in the towel, when you feel like giving up, when it seems as if you are at your wit's end, when it seems as if you cannot go on any longer. Yes, you've made some mistakes in life, but you can rise above those mistakes. Do not allow death, do not allow darkness, and do not allow despair to have the final say-so in your life or have the final say-so about your life. I say to you on this morning, you have the ability to rise. God has resurrecting power and the ability to speak life into dead situations. They wrote Jesus of Nazareth off, did everything they could to trip him up, got one of his disciples to betray him. He prayed and asked God to remove the bitterness from his life. And God said to him, in order to rid yourself from the bitterness, you must drink from the cup of bitterness without becoming bitter yourself. They created denigrating narratives. They laid out false accusations. Some of the soldiers even wrote him off. They mocked him and shook their heads in disbelief. The same crowd that followed him into Nain turned against him in chapter 23. They wrote him off. They put his body in a tomb. But when the women went back, just a few days later, they found that the stone had been rolled away. The old church would declare that's not how The story ends. 3 days later, God rose again. And because God resurrected Jesus from a dead situation, and because Jesus of Nazareth resurrected this man from a dead situation, you have the ability to rise above sickness and despair. You have the ability to rise above death and darkness. Get up out of the situation that you're in. Don't write yourself off. That's not the end. It does not matter what they said about you. God can rewrite the story of your life. And is that not our testimony this morning?